What if we told you that the aircraft responsible for making jet travel an everyday experience for millions of people has been almost completely forgotten? In 1960, flying on a jet was still an event, something you dressed up for, something that belonged to the wealthy, the well-connected, and the lucky few who lived near the right airports. If you were from Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Syracuse, New York, jet travel wasn't part of your world. You flew on propeller planes, looked up at the contrails in the sky, and wondered when the future would arrive for you. The answer came in the form of a single aircraft, a machine that no one had ever built before, solving a problem that most people didn't even know existed. This is the story of the Boeing 727, the jet that didn't wait for the world to be ready. It built the world that was needed, and then quietly disappeared into the background once its job was done. Today we're going to change that. Welcome to the World Documentaries, a nation divided by runway length. To truly understand why the Boeing 727 was so revolutionary, we need to travel back to the early 1960s and look at the state of American aviation infrastructure. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago had invested heavily in the jet age. Their airports had runways stretching 10,000 feet or more, specialized ground power equipment to start jet engines, and dedicated boarding infrastructure. But the United States is a vast country with hundreds of smaller cities, and those cities had airports built for a different era entirely. The runways at these regional airports typically measured just 5,000 to 6,000 feet, barely enough for a propeller-driven DC-3, let alone a roaring jet. The existing jets of the era, like the Boeing 77, required both long runways and extensive ground support equipment simply to operate. Airlines faced a painful reality. An entire generation of Americans living outside the major hubs was being left behind, still waiting for the jet age to reach them. The airlines issue a challenge. By the early 1960s, the airlines couldn't ignore this problem any longer. Eastern Airlines, United Airlines, and American Airlines, three of the most powerful carriers in the country, sat down with Boeing and issued a very specific engineering challenge. They needed a jet aircraft capable of operating from New York's LaGuardia Airport, where runways measured just 7,000 feet. More importantly, they needed a jet that could reliably serve hundreds of smaller cities across their route networks, where conditions were even more demanding. This was no small ask. Designing a commercially viable jet that could take off and land in such constrained conditions, while still being fast and economical enough to compete with existing aircraft on longer routes, seemed almost contradictory. The very features that made jets fast, their high approach speeds and powerful engines, were the same features that made them incompatible with short runways. Boeing's engineers had to solve a problem that appeared, on the surface, to be unsolvable: engineering the impossible. Boeing's answer began with one bold decision: move all three engines to the rear of the aircraft. This wasn't a stylistic choice, it was a radical engineering solution that unlocked everything else. Unconventional aircraft like the Boeing 77 wing-mounted engines disrupted airflow over the wings, limiting how much lift could be generated at low speeds. By clustering all three engines at the tail, Boeing freed the entire wing for one purpose: maximum lift. The result was the most sophisticated wing system ever fitted to a commercial airliner up to that point, featuring triple-slotted Fowler flaps that increased wing area by 25% when fully deployed, and leading-edge slats that worked in concert to achieve lift coefficients that had never been seen before. The practical outcome was astonishing. The 727 could safely land at approach speeds of just 120 to 150 knots, dramatically slower than comparable jets of the era. But the re-engine layout created its own engineering puzzles. The center engine required air delivered through an S-shaped duct routed through the vertical stabilizer, a marvel of fluid dynamics that initially caused serious engine surge problems during testing. Engineers solved it with vortex generators, small fins that tamed the airflow and eliminated the instability. Meanwhile, the distinctive T-tail design with the horizontal stabilizer perched atop the vertical fin required careful aerodynamic work to prevent the dangerous phenomenon known as a deep stall, where disturbed airflow could overwhelm the tail surfaces entirely. The airplane that carried its own airport, the ability to land on a short runway, would have meant very little if the 727 still required a fleet of specialized ground equipment to function. So Boeing made a second revolutionary decision. The aircraft would be entirely self-sufficient. Tucked into the keel beam of the main landing gear base sat an auxiliary power unit, essentially a small jet engine that generated electricity and compressed air independently of any external source. With the APU running, a 727 could power its own air conditioning, run all onboard electrical systems, and start its three main engines without a single piece of external ground equipment. For airports that had never hosted a jet aircraft in their history, this was transformative. But Boeing went one step further, adding what would become the 727's most iconic and eventually most controversial feature: a set of ventral air stairs built directly into the rear fuselage beneath the center engine. With the press of a button from the cockpit, a staircase would unfold downward from the aircraft's belly, creating a boarding entrance that required absolutely no ground support. The 727 could land at a remote field with nothing but pavement and a perimeter fence. board a full load of passengers walking across the tarmac, and depart for any destination in the world. The airline industry had never seen anything like it, changing America from the sky. When the Boeing 727 entered revenue service with Eastern Airlines on February 1, 1964, the transformation of American air travel began almost immediately. Airlines deployed the new jet on routes that had never seen jet service. Cities like Rochester, Syracuse, and Tulsa suddenly had connections to the modern world of aviation. Passengers who had spent years boarding slow, noisy propeller aircraft stepped onto sleek, quiet jets for the very first time, and the experience changed their relationship with travel forever. The aircraft quickly earned a nickname that said everything the DC-3 of the jet age, comparing it to the Douglas airliner that had similarly democratized air travel in the 1930s. The 727-200, a stretched variant introduced in 1967 that added 20 feet to the fuselage and capacity for 58 more passengers, took those economics even further. Of the 1,832 Boeing 727s ultimately produced before the final one rolled off the assembly line in September 1984, the majority were this stretched version. The 727 held the record as the world's best-selling jet airliner in history until Boeing's own 737 surpassed it in the early 1990s. For an entire generation of Americans, the 727 was not just an aircraft, it was their first encounter with the jet age. Legends, mysteries, and a hijacker. The very features that made the 727 an operational miracle would also write two of the strangest chapters in aviation history. On November 24, 1971, a man traveling under the alias Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a 727 flying from Portland to Seattle, after claiming to have a bomb and collecting $200,000 in ransom along with 4 parachutes. Cooper waited until the aircraft was airborne over the Pacific Northwest wilderness, then lowered the 727's rear ventral air stair and leaped into the night. He was never found. The case remains the only unsolved airplane hijacking in the history of commercial aviation, and it prompted Boeing to develop the Cooper vane, a simple aerodynamic device that permanently prevented the rear stairs from being deployed in flight. Then, on May 25, 2003, a 727 registered as N844AA disappeared from Quatro de Fevereiro Airport in Luanda, Angola. The aircraft, which had been grounded for over a year in a financial dispute, taxied onto the runway without clearance and took off with only 2 unqualified individuals aboard. It was never seen again. Despite extensive searches by American intelligence agencies, partly driven by post-9/11's concerns about a large jet being weaponized, no trace of the aircraft has ever been recovered. The 727's legendary ability to operate from remote locations, with minimal support, made all theories plausible and none provable. Some stories, it seems, are never resolved. The legacy hidden in plain sight by the 1980s, the same engineering that had made the 727 so revolutionary, was beginning to show its age. 3 engines consumed significantly more fuel than 2. The rear-mounted engine configuration required complex structural reinforcement. Newer twin-engine aircraft, Boeing's own 737 and 757, along with the Airbus A320, offered efficiency the 727 simply couldn't match. As passenger services wound down across U.S. fleets in the early 2000s, many 727s found second lives as cargo aircraft in Africa, South America, and the Middle East, places where the original design virtues, rugged self-sufficiency and short-field capability, still mattered most. By 2016, just 64 remained in commercial operation worldwide. When you board a modern narrow-body aircraft today, whether it's a 737, an A320, or any regional jet, you're experiencing a world that the Boeing 727 built. The assumption that a jet can serve any city with adequate runway length, that ground infrastructure is universal, that passengers everywhere can connect to the global air network, none of that existed before the 727 proved it was possible. Boeing engineered solutions to problems that no longer exist precisely because the 727 solved them. And that, ultimately, is the mark of a truly transformative technology. It makes itself invisible by making its achievements feel inevitable. If you've enjoyed this story, we'd love to know. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the World Documentaries for more stories like this one.